Welcome back to Faith, Frauds, and Falsehoods, where we explore various cults and religions of the world. Tonight, we're discussing the International Churches of Christ, aka the International Christian Church. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to help others find us.
Yeah, that's where we're at tonight, Matt. So before we get started, let's make it real clear that these are our opinions and not those of our churches or employers. So, shall we? It's been a while.
Yes, we took a little time off, did a little more research, had a lot of things going on in life.
That's for sure.
So we've been a few weeks, a couple weeks, I think 2 weeks since our last episode.
Yeah, we had to skip a week here because got to do some traveling. So it's all well and good. So we're talking tonight about the teachings of the ICOC, right? And this is one of those that we have to be very careful, Matt, because we could talk all night on these things, right? So we want to be respectful of each other's time and of our viewers' time. So, have you done any digging into teachings? Have you found anything unique or fun that maybe isn't in my notes before we
Nothing that's
dive
not
right
in your
in?
notes.
Okay.
But there's one overall teaching, and I don't know, I really want to bring it up now or at the end. But I guess I'll bring it up now. We're going to go over it on every single point we make here, and then we're going to go over it at the end again, which is the teaching of exclusivity.
There
you go.
Yep.
They believe they're the only one.
Yep.
Not only are they a rebirth of the church, which is a common Church of Christ teaching, and some Church of Christ also believe this, but in general, the Church of Christ nowadays does not believe they're the only Christians.
Right.
But the ICOC does very much teach that, that they are the only church.
Yeah, so you pointed out...
The only valid church.
Right, that they teach that they're kind of a restoration of the church, right? They come from that restorationist movement, Alexander Campbell and Stone, I can't remember Stone's first name, late 1800s, early 1900s.
Revivalist.
No, restorationist.
Restorationist, there you go.
Yep. So this was
the R word.
Yeah. For them, this was a return to the doctrines and lifestyle of the first century church. Can only occur when we abandon the apostatized systems and their poisoned foundations of traditions and hypocrisy. The path is both frightening and exhilarating, for only by studying the Bible and then by trial and error implementation of these rediscovered teachings can a movement be forged like the original.
Which seems like a good thing, that, hey, we're going to return to what the church was. Oh, I know this affects your sensibilities here.
It does.
But it seems like a good thing that we're going to return to what the church was.
Absolutely.
And so this was a whole movement, and this wasn't just the ICOC. This is really what started the whole Church of Christ thing.
Right, Church of Christ, Disciples of Christ. Yep, the whole thing.
Yeah. But go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just reiterating my point. This is not necessarily a bad thing all by itself. Like a lot of things, it's how we go further with it, right? So this is where it came from. They were trying to get back to the church on the shores of Galilee type thing. Right. Which is, where a lot of other churches have come from in the past and years before them even.
Yeah, a lot of... This came out of a time, right, the Second Great Awakening. The spirituality of specifically the United States was ramping up again. And people wanted more. Particularly the Restorationist movement was very anti-Roman Catholic, very anti-creed of any sort, right? Their idea was the Bible and nothing but the Bible, right?
Right.
And Kip McKean, right, who started this ICOC, or really took over the ICOC and expanded it to the extremes that it became, once in one of his sermons said, "The Lord allowed me to begin the restoration of the New Testament church from a small group of 30 would-be disciples in the Gimpel's living room in June 1979 in Boston.
So let's remember what he's referring to there. We talked about back during our history episode was whenever the church in Boston called him to come be their pastor, he said, I will only come if you will all be serious about it. If you all will pledge that you're going to follow me.
Yep.
Notice he didn't say pledge you're going to follow Jesus. So you're going to follow me.
It's interesting, right? This is 1979, so 80 years after the beginning of the Stone Campbell movement, right? And he's now saying that he's beginning the restoration of the church. Yeah.
Because that's the difference here, is that they think they are the church.
They're the original. Right. Yep.
Right.
And this idea of trial and error implementation, right, that he had mentioned previously, is kind of a bit of a problem. Because if you're saying that God is giving you all the answers out of the Bible, there can't be trial and error. It either is or it isn't, right? But
I think there's a lot of details in there I would very much disagree with.
I was going to say, this will be an episode where you and I probably disagree on a lot of things.
Yeah, because I think there's very much trial and error in the church and in your workings. And I very much believe that the Bible gives us our answers. But I also know the Bible doesn't speak to everything, and I think that's the Lord's intention.
Yep.
So there's going to be some trial and error and some differences and things.
Yeah, that's why Paul said the church is the foundation and pillar of the truth, not the Bible.
So I think you can have both of those things.
Right. Yeah.
And he didn't say not the Bible. You added those last words.
Well, yeah, he didn't say that, but he didn't. Anyway, so they were also influenced by the shepherding movement, right, of the 60s. This came out of a lot of charismatic Pentecostal style of churches where individuals were given authority. I would say authority would probably be a good word for it.
I agree with that.
To guide other people. These leaders, these people with authority generally were considered to have a special anointing from God. And so the ICOC took a lot of the teachings from this and applied it internally as well.
Oh, this was kind of what made them so much different, was this shepherd.
Right.
This you're calling it the shepherding movement, but they call it discipling.
Right.
And I've heard some people compare and contrast this and talk about this coming out of Eastern religions, with the whole guru thing. This is kind of an example of that same sort of mentality of following a guru, someone who is further along than you in the spiritual progress.
So it's, yes, I could see some people saying that that's coming out of more guruism, right? But a lot of the things that the Church of Christ and the ICOC teach are still taught in the Eastern Orthodox Church, right? It's not taught in the same way, right? But the overall concept, the ICOC doesn't have wrong. They just have the implementation and the extremity of it wrong. And this is one of those things, right?
For our friends in the evangelical church here in America, what they're calling discipling, we would call, it was on the tip of my tongue a minute ago.
Like accountability partners?
Yep, accountability partners. Yep. We call them accountability partners. And I don't know that having an accountability partner is such a bad thing. Some people would say it's a very essential thing to have somebody in life that you share that much with to hold you accountable for spiritual things. And I think that's where they started with this, and that's what he kind of started with. And let's remember this. Let's not discount that this movement originally came out of a college ministry. And the reason that's so important is because college students are often at a juncture in their life. They're at a juncture in their life where they're leaving their family. They're kind of starting out on their own, making decisions, but they're not completely on their own. Often shielded from in the college campus, but often exposed to many new things. This is often the first time they've came out of their local communities and their local sphere, and now they're exposed to all these other people and cultures and different stuff. This meshing you see in college that happens. And so they're searching for things, right? And so having somebody who can come along and guide you through that can be a very reassuring thing. So this was a very effective method in college ministry. And this is what Kip was taught when he was working in college ministry. And you'll notice he goes back and over again in his ministry back to the college ministry. And that's a strong recruitment place.
Right.
For him. So this was essential to their teachings. And this to this day is still used quite a bit. They have in modern day lessened on the discipleship thing, but it's still a major thing they teach. It's just not as required as it once was. That's what we're told anyway.
Right. It's a
lot of people don't believe them.
I think maybe they likely would have reduced some of the astringency of it. Right. It's not quite so strict, and
they got to tell you what makeup to wear and what color of shirt to wear.
Overly applied to the material, but it's probably still very much the same at the spiritual level.
Yeah.
And
I have friends who are not part of this movement, but are very much part of the accountability partners thing, who are really into that. But their accountability partner doesn't tell them what shirt to wear.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a difference in an accountability partner and someone who tells you how to live your life, how much money to have in your bank account.
Right. And your accountability partner is your friend, not necessarily someone who God has put in authority over you, which is another difference in the teaching. They teach that God put this person in authority over you. You know, I remember when we talked about the IBLP, we talked about, you know, the authority and having authority over other people and everything was a big deal. Well, this is a similar type thing. But this isn't necessarily your father or your husband or something like that. It's somebody the church decided, okay, this is your discipler.
Yep.
Everybody gets assigned a discipler, not necessarily who recruited you.
Right. Yeah. It's an assigned status, not you and I talking and me sharing or you sharing with me. Right. It's someone is assigned. Right.
And it's not, a difference between accountability partners. It's not, I know we're trying to keep this episode short, but this stuff is a very central thing to what they do. It is not a two-way street either.
Right.
The idea of accountability partners, this is a two-way street. You share with each other, right? But this is top down.
Yep. Very much so. Let's move on to their next core teaching that I'm sure that you will love. Baptism by immersion is necessary for salvation. The ICOC teaches that baptism is essential for salvation and that baptism can only be valid if it is performed by one having authority from the ICOC.
Again, only baptisms they accept is what happened there. This is an important thing because they often will recruit people who are Christians, but they don't consider them real Christians, so they make them get rebaptized. It's one of the very first things they do. It's also one of the numbers they record and report, so it looks real good because they have all these people getting baptized all the time.
Right. Kip McKean himself went and stated, you must respond to Jesus with the commitment of a disciple, which is defined by the ICOC, and then and only then can you be baptized to be saved.
Yeah, otherwise it's not valid. Is what is their opinion.
I know that I like to push back to the Eastern Orthodox Church, but shortly after the Nicene Council, some of the bishops got together and wrote up how do you accept people who had been Arians, right? And even those who had been Arian teachers weren't expected to be rebaptized, right? It just this whole idea that it's this legal status, right? You have to do this exactly the right way. Right? It's a very Roman Catholic thing, but it's not a very Christian thing.
Even the Roman Catholics accept the baptism of others. You could be Baptist and convert to Roman Catholic. You don't get rebaptized.
Yep, they just confirm you. Yep.
However,
which comes from
I should mention
Council
it is a Church of Christ thing generally that baptism is part of salvation,
right? Versus
the traditional Baptists, who is the famous ones for being baptism by submersion, is baptism is an expression of your faith, but it's not your faith itself. It's not your salvation.
Yep. Which is why I pulled this statement from Martin Luther. I don't know if you're seeing it on your.
I see
if
it.
you're looking at the notes. This was one that always gets me, right? Because the issue is what it means to be saved, right? It's what it really boils down to. But Martin Luther, in the Large Catechism of, 1551? I didn't write the date down. But he wrote, in the second place, since we know what baptism is and how it is to be regarded, we must also learn why and for what purpose it is instituted. That is, what it profits, gives, and works. And this also we cannot discern better than from the words of Christ above, quoted, "He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. Therefore state it most simply thus, that the power, work, profit, fruit, and end of baptism is this, namely to save." Typically this would be where people stop. But for no one is baptized in order that he may become a prince, but as the words declare that he be saved. But to be saved, we know, is nothing else than to be delivered from sin, death, and the devil, and to enter into the kingdom of Christ and to live with him forever. So even Martin Luther recognized that baptism was more than just an expression. Sorry, Matt, for the Baptists. But
the then Catholic Martin Luther, or after he converted to Lutheranism?
This is well after the Reformation. This is part of the Large Catechism.
A trick question, but okay.
Yeah,
Martin Luther was always a Catholic.
Well, true. Yeah, because he was excommunicated, but
okay.
Yeah. Nonetheless, right. The point here is that to be saved, right, is to be delivered from sin, death, and the devil, and to enter into the kingdom of Christ. The kingdom of Christ is today. It is now. Right.
Well, and there's a lot of people who would, as we know, this is a common thing. Some denominations believe baptism is to be saved, some believe it isn't. The counterpoint there of baptism is, you only get baptized to be saved, is that the thief on the cross obviously wasn't baptized, right? That's the quick, easy one right there.
Well, but you can't use the exception to define the rule.
So we can't have any exceptions don't count.
No, it's not.
See how that's complicated?
No. Right.
That's what I'm saying. So different denominations believe it different. The Methodists believe you can just sprinkle somebody and be baptized. They don't believe that you have to immerse.
Right.
There are some denominations which do both.
Valid.
On there. The ICOC does believe in submersion baptism.
Right. Immersion only. Yep.
Because they believe that it's a symbol of death and rebirth, and you can't have death unless you're being submerged into the grave.
Right.
You don't get sprinkled into the grave. Again, there's one point there, right? But what's important about the way they teach it is they teach that baptism is only valid if they do it.
Right. Yep. Yeah. Again, like we said earlier, the extremism is where they falter. Right. The fact that they teach that baptism is necessary for salvation isn't a bad thing. Right. The fact that they teach that it has to be done by someone that is approved by them is the problem. Is a major problem.
Okay.
So some of the other things that they teach, we're not even to my second point yet. My goodness. Actually, I'm gonna skip down to D.
So you need to go over D, though.
Yeah, another thing that comes up quite frequently in the Church of Christ, but especially in the ICOC, is be silent where the Bible speaks and speak where the Bible is silent. In applying scriptural principles to build the visible church, we believe that we must obey God's word, but where the Bible does not prohibit a practice or name, we are free to use our God-given creativity. For example, the principles of Bible talks, lead evangelists, discipleship partners, and regions are in the scriptures, though the terms are not. However, they're not prohibited. Also, instrumental music and paid women's ministry is not prohibited in the scriptures, which is interesting, right? This is post split in 2006, where the Portland movement started to become the International Christian Church, because the Church of Christ, right, is very much instrumental music is
generally
prohibited,
yes.
Right? Generally. So he's breaking away from that mainline teaching and landing more with the disciples of Christ, or the Christian church, which was Stone's movement. I think it was Stone. Because it's not prohibited, therefore it's acceptable. Whereas the other path is generally, if it's not approved, then it's prohibited.
Which
so
is
he's kind of flipped it.
He flips a lot of things sometimes, especially using the discipleship model. He'll use that as an excuse to introduce something that maybe isn't strictly biblical, but if he doesn't have anything strictly to go against it or a solid argument against it, and remember, he's the only one who makes the arguments.
Yep.
After he left the ICOC, he was not the only one in charge anymore, but in the ICC, he is still the only one in charge. So remember, since Kip McKean makes the arguments, he's the one who's the final authority and all. So he can claim biblical authority all he wants, but in the end, he's the biblical authority.
Yep. He has made himself a pope.
I mean, even more than the Pope. There's no secession plan. There's nothing like that, you know?
Yeah. So I'm going to jump down to discipling. And so we'll mention it because people hopefully will know kind of what it is. But in one of the articles, they were accused of love bombing their people. So typically,
common cult practice. Also a common small church growth practice.
It is. Yep.
Honestly.
Very much a hit them with all the love you can. And then in this case, right, the bombing side of it was a big deal, right? They got into the deep authoritarian control your life, manipulation, etc.
Right. Well, so these people love me. Look at all these things these people have done for me. So if this stuff's a little weird, I'll just accept that for a little while. Yep. And a lot of people, when I've read their stories who became part of the ICOC, that's how it started. They got invited to a Bible study. They were doing the discipling thing. Man, these people love me. They're really trying to help me. And again, this is where they're so successful in young adults, college life, people who are trying to search and find things. These people can help me figure things out. They really care for me. And then you start accepting little by little. It's like the frog in the pot of water we've talked about many times with the cults, you know? This discipling thing. At first, the discipler doesn't get all up in your business. They just tell you how to lead a better life spiritually. Look, you should be following Jesus more closely. And then all of a sudden it becomes, you shouldn't eat broccoli. You know?
Or
you shouldn't take that job. You should move to California instead of taking the job you've been going to school for.
Yep.
Come work for the church for no money.
You should marry that person. Yep.
Yeah, who you
time
should
to start
marry.
Having kids. It's everything. So discipling in the ICOC refers to their requirement for members to intensively recruit others, to conform to the movement's standards, and to submit to their internal hierarchical system of relationships and accountability. Every single member of every congregation must be committed to making disciples. This is Kip McKean. If any are not, then they are not disciples themselves. And if they are not disciples themselves, then they will not be going to heaven.
So one thing we hadn't mentioned here is that they very much are the thing of works-based faith. You know, you got to do works to get to heaven, and you can lose your salvation.
Right.
Definitely not once saved, always saved, folks. They're definitely lose your salvation people. And Kip seemed to mention that a lot and seemed to have a lot of control over if you lost your salvation. Basically, if you didn't get with the program, you would not be going to heaven, just like in his statement there.
Yep.
Now, I dare you to pronounce this next name you got written down here.
Flaville Yekli?
There you go.
Yes. I don't know. He described the hierarchical system of discipling as a system of intense training and close personal supervision of the Christians being discipled. Disciples are regarded as being superior to mere Christians. Disciples are said to be Christians who have received special training. The discipler gives detailed personal guidance to the Christian being discipled, This guidance may include instructions concerning many personal matters of totally secular nature. That discipler is the person who must be imitated and obeyed.
And when you give someone power like that, it's easy for them, even if they mean well, to start going too far with that.
Yep.
Right? I see parents do this all the time with their grown children, right? They're their parent, and when they were 10 years old, they had to tell them everything they needed to do. But now if their kid's 27 years old or 47 years old, maybe you don't need to be quite so involved in all that stuff, right?
Right.
The discipler role is very easy to start pushing that more and more and more and take more control over someone's life. And not everybody who disciples someone else is necessarily a bad person, but because they're learning from what they were told and it comes down from the top from Kip, it became more and more extreme. Yep. They had to have conversations very often and do things very often,
Almost, if you think back to Nexium, in DOS, right? You had this person that was over you, and as soon as they called, you had better be able to respond.
Yep,
right?
And this is a very similar relationship.
This is a very similar relationship. Yep. Which is, again, right? It's the extreme, right? Because the church has always taught that there's a spiritual father, right? Someone that you willingly choose to go to and talk to and get advice and guidance, and because they are more mature than you, right? That's just part of it, right? There's going to be people that know more than us. Believe it or not, Matt, there are people that know more than me and you. But
the Bible teaches us that no one is without sin,
right?
And no one is perfect in that. Even if we look at the example of Paul was a spiritual father to Timothy. And yet he was also really mean to Timothy.
Yeah, he was. Yep.
He committed sins against Timothy. So that's why the Bible doesn't teach us that we're accountable to a person.
Right.
We're accountable to God.
We just go to them for advice and guidance, not anything further.
Yeah.
Yep. Sin for the ICOC must be confessed often. Especially in a system of what is deemed prayer buddies, two individuals who confess their sins to one another.
And that's not necessarily the discipler. That could be someone else.
Right, but it's also commonly done with the discipler. Many times the ICOC published and circulated to its members lists of individuals and the sins they have confessed so that people can pray for them. Yep.
I didn't see that. Wow.
Yeah, that's a little excessive.
So they'd make a list of who and what sins they did.
Yep.
So they can pray for them. Listen, I know we're coming up on time, but I got to share this story because it's just a important part of my spiritual development. And it's something I want to share real quick. So years ago, I used to serve on this church, and I was one of the ministers at this church in youth ministry. And part of our practices was when on Sunday morning, that all the ministers would come up front at the altars, and whenever we did the altar call, we would pray with people. You've heard me tell this story before, so I'm telling it mostly for our listeners here. They would come and pray with people. Well, I often had a very close relationship with the parents of my students, right? Of course. This one family I was especially close with and had a couple of their students in my ministry, and they came forward and they wanted to pray for a relative of theirs who was also there in church. He wasn't normally there in church, but he was there that day, cousin. And they told me all about his sins, all the many things he had done wrong and why he just needed Jesus and he needed salvation and just how bad this old dude was, And we're sitting over here and I'm listening to all this, and I know in my heart this is spiritually not a good thing because you don't need to know all the details to pray for somebody sometime, right? But the Lord imprinted this in my heart that day because while I'm sitting here praying with them on the other end of the room, at the other end of the altar, he's on his knees praying to Jesus. And that was the day he accepted Jesus. So after service is over, when people have done that, we often, as a church, line up and greet them, shake their hand, hug them, welcome to the family, welcome brother, that sort of thing, right? And I have to get in line and do this, and I got to shake this guy's hand while I know all of his sins. That was very hard Because when I should be thanking God that there's a new brother in the kingdom here, instead I'm sitting here thinking about all of his sins and all the bad things he's done as I'm shaking his hand. You know, I resolved that day that I didn't need to know everybody's sin anymore.
Right.
Just wasn't necessary. That's for the Lord to take that burden on. It's not my burden of other people's sins. So,
I don't know.
anyways.
Paul calls us to bear one another's burdens.
You're just trying to be argumentative.
I know. No, there's a line, right? And it's not for every person to bear other sins, right? And what they're doing in this case, right, is they're laying that burden on so many different people. Again, confession is good, right? To confess and say, I struggle with this, I struggle with that, right?
Right.
Is a good thing. Because just like you send an alcoholic to Alcoholics Anonymous, and the first thing they have to say is, hi, my name is Bryan and I'm an alcoholic, right? You name it, right? Because once you name it, you can fight it.
You got to admit it.
Right? You've got to give it up, right? And so confession gives you that.
But that's an individual thing. I don't think that this writing, making a list and circling it around is a good thing.
Exactly, right. They take the extreme. Most cults that we talk about are cults because they went to the extreme.
Yep, for sure.
So I found, so I'm going to kind of put all this into one, right? One of the things that Kip, in a much later article after the Portland movement, the ICC became a thing, he wrote, "We believe in a central leadership," right? Because up to this point, right, he had been the leader. Throughout God's word, when his people were unified, there was a strong central leadership and godly central leader. So I find it interesting, right? Because most of the Church of Christ and a huge swath of the Protestant church is congregational.
Yes.
There is no central leadership like the Pope. And yet, here Kip is making himself a Pope.
Yeah, he your examples you wrote out, he gave with Moses, Joshua, David,
right.
Jesus.
Yep. And the apostles, right? Which he didn't take into account Acts chapter 15. But so what happened, right, is he started to use this central leadership and became very authoritarian. The authority of the leaders, they claimed was God-given and delegated by God to such an extent that in disobeying them, one is disobeying God. Right? So disobeying Kip is disobeying God. Is how it has eventually worked its way out.
Well, that helps him to stay into leadership. And you mentioned this was after he started ICC, which is basically his restart of the ICOC.
Yep.
So tell us what's happening with the ICOC. Where do we go with that?
So the ICOC, right? They
have a little different leadership style.
They kind of kicked Kip out, and they have moved toward an elder board, a group of leaders planning vision for the association, but each individual congregation is kind of congregational. There is no Pope, there is no Kip McKean running things anymore for the ICOC.
Since he's left, you've seen more individualization of their different congregations. Right. Some dropping the ICOC name and etc. while they're still being in association with it. Mm-hmm. They claim they're becoming more mainstream. Some people say, oh, no, they're not really. And as best as I can tell, that kind of varies per congregation.
Right.
I think some of their congregations have become more mainstream, even using the term as Bible churches and different things now.
Right.
Some maybe not as much. They're kind of the same people. So that's the teachings of the ICOC, pretty much.
Yep. That's the notes that I've got. I mean, I've got more, but we're at our 35-minute mark. So,
okay, folks. Well,
drop us a comment. Let us know what you think.